Hi, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Mautic Day 3 or Day 5 or the last day of the conference. I hope everyone has had a great conference. What I'm going to talk about today is the future of deliverability. Where are we going? What are we going to end up seeing? And how are things changing? For those of you who don't know who I am, and there's probably a lot of you, but some of you may know, I am a deliverability expert. I was actually trained as a scientist, so I'm a molecular biologist by training, but I moved into email deliverability back in 2000, starting working at the Mail Abuse Prevention Service, helping try and build out their outsourced abuse desk. So the idea was we were going to block the bad mail, but we were also going to teach people how not to send spam. Maps kind of imploded when the dot-com went bust, and I started off an independent consulting company, which became Word to the Wise with my partner, Steve. And we've been working in email and looking at email deliverability and the technology behind email and all of that for the last 25 years. So today I'm really going to focus on three areas related to email and talk about where they started, kind of where they are, and then where I see them going, and give you some ideas and things to think about as we build the future. And I'm going to pull out my crystal ball a little bit, but the future is always a little foggy. And we'll see what's going on and maybe what we can pull out of this and what we need to think about as we're developing products and as we're developing new marketing systems and things. So I'm going to be talking about email filters, where they are, why we have email filters, what they do, and where I see filters going and where I see the evolution of email filters. I'm going to talk about inbox features. So there's been some developments in inboxes over the years, and I think we're hitting the point where a lot of features are being built into the inbox, and a lot of features are being built into what it is that a mailbox is. And then I'm going to talk about email metrics, and this is kind of the things that we use to measure whether or not our mail is succeeding, whether or not our marketing is succeeding. They're not competent, they're not effective in the current world of email marketing. And so we need to think about what the traditional metrics are, we need to think about how they're failing us, and then we need to think about what's the next stage, what are we going to do next time? And then we're going to pull out the crystal ball and talk about some things. So, filters. Much of what happens in email, and particularly in my specialty, deliverability, is driven by what are the filters doing. Deliverability is a response to mail being filtered and mail not making it to the inbox and mail being blocked. It is not something that we've just decided it is. We are a response to how filters are handling mail. And providers and software security companies are constantly upgrading filters to address ongoing threats and respond to feedback from users. So if we understand kind of the trajectory of where filters started and where they are, we can think about where are they going to go. So in the beginning, long ago, why do we have filters? Why were filters brought up? And filters were brought up because there was bad mail out there. And in fact, in the very early days, filters were more about protecting the network. Spam became such a volume problem and spam became such an issue that it was actually causing DOS-style attacks against mail servers. And so filters, at the edge, blocking mail, blocking IP addresses, that was all a way to protect the network from bad traffic. It wasn't necessarily about, keeping mail out of the inbox or keeping spam from bothering people or keeping malware from bothering people. It was a network thing. And that's really part of why we have IP-based filters, is because we were trying to protect the network from malicious traffic. As we got a handle on that, and as the filters got better, and as we got the techniques, and as mail servers had more capacity, they had more slots, they had more TCP slots, you could handle more mail. Then we got to the point where we started giving users some ways to manage their mail. We started with the spam folder, we started with the "this is spam" button, we did all of those things. So we went from protecting the network to protecting the individual user. And where a lot of this innovation came from was the big mailbox providers. And back in the early days, that was actually, in the US at least, that was AOL. AOL did a lot of things, developed a lot of techniques that we're still using today. They invented the feedback loop. They invented the this is spam button. They invented the spam folder. They did a whole lot of things to try and help their users deal with the onslaught of spam. And the things that they did that were expensive and that smaller groups couldn't do back then are now actually doable. And like some of the stuff that AOL did that we couldn't do then, we're doing on our little tiny network of like four people and two cats. So, that's how it evolves. We look to the big providers. What are the big providers doing? And then we can see where the filters are going to go from there. So this is actually an image I created for a talk back in the mid 2000s. And it was all about, at that point, everything was about domain reputation, deliverability and filters. It was about that IP address reputation. What is your IP address? What is the reputation of that IP address? And then we're going to make delivery decisions based on that IP address. And we can change that image a little bit and redo it like this, where we have the blue box there is your IP reputation. You have multiple companies using that IP. All of that comes into a single point, which is that IP address. The filtering engine makes decisions, and then it delivers the mail to all of those individual people, all those users on that system, as one set of emails. It's either all in the inbox or it's all in the spam folder. So it's a simple model. It's a very simple model in that your IP is your reputation and your reputation drives your delivery. And this was really good for senders. As a matter of fact, all you needed to do to get good delivery was to find yourself a good IP address or have a dedicated IP so that the only reputation on that IP was yours, and you could get certified. You could use inbox placement tools to measure your performance. You could do a whole lot of things based on that IP address that would make sure that your delivery was good. And so all we really had to focus on was IP reputation. Where this failed, though, and where this wasn't sufficient for purpose, was for the users, because users were all getting the same experience. And some users, and one of the challenges that filters were trying to address, was that some users want particular mails and other users think that exact same mail is spam. So you always had this kind of push-pull and a little bit of conflict between those users who were happy to receive this mail and other users who thought, absolutely, this mail is spam. So we needed a way to kind of clarify what was going on. We needed a way to separate out companies. We needed a way, something better than IP reputation that was more granular than IP reputation. And so enter domain reputation. We started off with IP reputation, and then there was a lot of work done behind the scenes with authentication strategies. The ones that we know of, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, but there were a number of strategies tried and tested to give a domain authentication so that you could use domain as a measure for reputation. And so we get this slightly more complicated image, which is we have IP reputation and we have domain reputation, and the domain reputation kind of modifies the IP reputation, and then you get to the filtering engine, and the filtering engine makes a decision. Is it a good mail? Is it green? Is it a bad mail? Is it red? At the same time that we were doing this on the filtering side, the mailbox providers were also looking at how do we give individual users an individual experience in the inbox. And so they were working on things like, is this sender in your address book? What does your interaction with mail says? Have you ever marked this mail as spam? So while they're doing granularity on the receiving side, and for the folks that are sending mail, they're also doing granularity on the user side. So the mail comes in, it gets judged by the filtering engine, it gets applied to, this should go to the inbox, this should go to the bulk folder. But then for this individual user, we're going to modify that decision based on their needs and their wants. So all of this is kind of that increasing to every user gets their own individual experience in the mailbox, and they get the mail they want and they don't get the mail that they don't want. And we can even go further, and this is closer to what we're getting to today, where now we have subdomain reputation added on top of that. And so if you look at some of the things that the ISPs are saying, if you look at some of the things that the filters are saying, they want to see you separate out your mail from marketing mail, transactional mail, password resets, receipts. They want you to have different identities. They want you to have different authentication for all of that kind of mail so that they can give the user a much more individualized interaction. And I don't expect you to actually, follow all of this. It's just kind of a visual representation of how complex things are getting and how it's not a simple, you have an IP and then the user has an experience. So as we look to the future, where are we going with filters? Where are the filters going? And the place to really look is, what are Yahoo and Google doing? Because they are the big mailbox providers right now. They're the ones that are taking the lead. They announced about 2 years ago now that they were putting in specific requirements for authentication, specific requirements for how your mail is set up. You have to have list unsubscribe headers. You have to do all of these things. And what we saw is, after they made that announcement, other groups are also taking on that as this is what we're going to do as well. You have to do that to get delivery here. So we're looking at improvement in authentication strategies. We're looking at ways to better authenticate mail. We're looking at ways to more accurately authenticate mail so that the filters can act on different mail streams in different ways. And then we're also looking at that individualized user experience. What do the users want, and how do we separate out mail after it's gone through the filter and we've made a general decision? What are the specific decisions? And so I really see IP, and even in some respects, domain reputation kind of falling away. And in fact, I'm going to talk about where we're seeing that really. And I'm also seeing that the filtering is going to be pushed back to the edge. So right now, mail comes in, and if it meets certain criteria, it's accepted, and then it is sent to individual users' inboxes or spam filters, depending on those users. I think what we're going to start seeing, and we're already seeing this with some providers like Mimecast, for instance, where they will reject mail with a message that says, we're rejecting this mail because this particular user blocked mail from you. And I think we're going to start seeing more of that. As we talk about the future and what's going on, there were a couple late-breaking announcements that came that I just threw in here as I was preparing the talk. La Poste, who is the French provider and handles a bunch of domains inside of France, they announced just this week that they were lowering their acceptable complaint rate from 2% to 1%. So you used to be able to get 2% complaints and you could still get delivered. And now they've cut that in half, and you have to have less than 1% complaints on your mail. They've also changed one of their rejection messages so that it's clearer when you're being rejected because you're not meeting their DKIM standards. So when you're not meeting their authentication standards, they say your mail is being rejected because it's not authenticated correctly. This is not a change in filtering. This is just a change in notification. We also had a couple announcements from Google. One of them is they're moving from Google Postmaster Tools version 1 to Google Postmaster Tools version 2. And they have said they are not taking over the IP and the domain reputation to the new Postmaster Tools interface. We're going to lose access to those domain reputation things. And this has caused a lot of controversy. There are some people who are really upset about it, but there are people like me who are looking at that and going, good, that wasn't a great metric anyway. Again, at Google in particular, at Yahoo, at some other places, reputation doesn't tell the whole story. And so the average reputation of a domain or the average reputation of an IP address does not drive deliverability to those individual users. And they're also announced just this week or possibly last week that they're ramping up enforcement. So they made the announcement in 2023 that you had to meet certain authentication criteria and certain formatting requirements. They've been kind of slowly ramping up enforcement, but now they're like, no, you have to do it. It's been 2 years. You should have had your stuff together. We're going to start bouncing mail. We're going to start rejecting mail, and we might put the mail in the spam folder, depending. But they're really getting serious about, these are not best practices. These are not recommendations. These are requirements. And if we don't bounce your mail, you're not going to comply with it. So we're going to start bouncing your mail. So that's kind of where the filters are and how the filters are really working to personalize that inbox for those individual users. And I think where we're going is that it's not reputation as a block to a block of users, it's a reputation with each individual user. And we're going to have to sort out how to do this in a privacy aware way where we can understand what our recipients are doing and what our recipients want. And we treat each of those individual recipients as a person and an individual rather than part of a segment or a cohort. And I think that's really where filters are going. We'll see how that turns out. So the next thing to talk about, that's the filtering piece. That's kind of the big, what's happening on the inbound. What happens once that mail gets to the inbox? And like filters, inboxes have grown and changed over the years. And this is just kind of my brain's thought of how I mentally break things up. We had kind of the basic inbox, which was pre-2000, which was really simple. We started getting spam folders, and this is spam buttons and some tools between 2000 and maybe 2010, 2014. And then we got tabs and priority folders and stuff to help manage the bulk email coming in as implemented by the mailbox providers. Again, these were innovations done by Google, who handles a lot of mail. And, for many marketers, they're the majority of consumer domains on their list. And then what are we going to see in the future? What are we going to see as we go forward? So pre-2000s inbox, it was really simple. A lot of people, including myself, were reading mail on Pine or Elm. So it was a text-only client. We could only, this is what it looked like when you got into the mailbox, is that little shell down there. If you wanted to filter mail, if you wanted to do anything to put mailing lists in a particular mailbox, you actually had to learn scripting. You had to go in and write a script, a proc mail filter, and so that you could sort your mail that way. In the 1990s, we also had the evolution and the launch of Netscape Navigator, which was one of the first HTML clients. So we're finally getting to the point where you can send HTML and mail, and there are ways to do it. But overall, mail was really simple. There was no "this is spam" button. There was no spam filter. There really wasn't anything magical in the inbox. Everything was presented basically in chronological order. Sometimes you could get new messages at the top. Sometimes they were kind of filtered in. It was a really simple, basic time. We get to the 2000s and we get to, AOL is becoming big, the .com is booming, and we start to see things like the spam folder, and we start to see a way to report spam. And again, these were all tools that were innovated by the mailbox providers as a way to give users more control over their inbox. And in fact, early on, spam could, in fact, fill up individual user mailboxes. It wasn't until 2004 that we had 2 gigabytes of space that Google was giving us. We had my first mailbox was 10 megabytes, and I had to fit my entire website content in there as well. So it was mail and my website had to fit in 10 megabytes. And if I hit that 10 megabytes, they'd start rejecting mail because my mailbox was full. So spam could be a problem for individual users by filling up their mailbox and things like that. And one of the things that providers did was they gave us a spam folder, but then they also took the mail that was in the spam folder out of our quota. And so they wouldn't reject mail just because we had a lot of spam sitting in our spam folder. But again, we're looking at primarily a chronological order thing. We're looking at not very many filters, not very many individual mailboxes. It wasn't very sophisticated. Now, we did start to see some innovation. Google and AOL would give you things like, these are your friends. These are the conversations that you start, and those might be at the top of the mailbox versus lower down in the mailbox. And so you could start to prioritize particular conversations or particular people in your inbox. In 2014, the big change, and I think the big innovation, was Google introduced the inbox tab. And so you could have priority tabs. You had your promotions tab. You had your networking tab. This was all about giving users control over the bulk mail that they were coming into. They're all the inbox. If you're in the promo tab and you're sending promotional mail, that's where you belong. Nobody has cracked the code. This is all Google doing the classification for you. But this is the first step along the path of really returning control over the inbox to the user. in a way that makes it easy for them to deal with large volumes of mail from particular senders. The other thing we saw in this period of time was email clients moving the unsubscribe functionality into the client rather than inside the email. So you're sending bulk mail, you have a list unsubscribe header in the headers of the message, and then these clients like Google, Yahoo, Apple, they all pull those out, and in the mailbox, in your inbox, you can see this message is from a mailing list. Do you want to unsubscribe? So again, making it easier for the user to control and manage the amount of mail that's coming in. And this is where inboxes are going. This is where we're going to be. They're going to give us, as users, more and more tools to control their mail. And in fact, just over the last 6 or 8, 10 months, we've seen Yahoo and Google create these subscription centers. And the Google one actually has not been rolled out to Europe yet. I was trying to get screenshots of it, and I'm like, oh, I don't have this because I'm in Dublin. And I looked, and it was like, yeah, it's not been rolled out to all of Europe yet. It's mostly a US thing. But you can go into your managed subscriptions, and you can see all of the bulk mail that you're getting, and you can see how many messages they've sent you, and you can manage the subscriptions, and you can unsubscribe from those messages from your inbox. You don't need to go find a message from that sender to unsubscribe. And so we're taking control away from the senders about what they're sending, and we're giving it to the users about what they're receiving. And I think this is going to continue, and I think we're going to see more and more ways that users are being given control over the bulk mail in their inbox. And that's something that as marketers and as senders, we're going to have to deal with, because we're going to have to make sure that we don't do anything that upsets a particular user, because once they've unsubscribed, that's it, game over. By law in many countries, you're not allowed to contact them again. They said, no, you have to stop. So that's filters and that's inboxes. Let's talk about metrics and where the metrics are going and what we're going to see with metrics. In terms of what we use, the primary metrics that I work with senders and marketers and my clients is opens and clicks. Now, the problem is that an open doesn't mean an open. An open means that an image was loaded. So somebody, in the early days, somebody would open their mailbox, they would open an email, any images in that email would be populated, and that would trigger an open report at the senders because a particular image was loaded. That's not how it works anymore, and I'm going to talk about that. Clicks as well. If you clicked on a link in an email, then that ended up at a website, and the website could track that as oh, this person clicked on this link in this email. However, now in the modern internet, there are clients that fetch all images before the user opens the mail. Google does it. Yahoo does it. Some mail clients do it. Apple Mail does it. So we cannot trust that an open means that the user has opened our mail, because the opens can happen before the user sees the mail. The opens can happen if the user has never seen the mail. So we need to think about opens not as this user actually wants our mail because they opened it. We need to think about it more broadly as, well, it made it to the inbox. Clicks as well. There are filters and mail clients that will follow all links in an email. We see that a lot in the security appliances that are done at business domains, but we've also seen some of the consumer domains as well following all links in a message. There was a point where Microsoft was being really aggressive about this, and there were a lot of opens from Microsoft. So this is just an image from the folks at Omnivory, who are doing a lot of work on what about bots and what about these non-human interactions. And this is their measurement of opens from iDevices. And so what you're seeing here is that at midnight, the number of opens peaks. And I love this image. And the first time I saw it, it kind of blew my mind. But what we're seeing is that when people are asleep at night and their devices are on to charge, that's when Apple is fetching all of those images and building all of those emails. And this is, I think, is the clearest indicator that opens don't correlate with a human opening the mail. And you can see it from other things as well, but this is just such a clear image. This is another image from a different talk. A mailbox provider and a bunch of ESPs got together and they looked at open rates as measured by each of them for the same cohort of mail. So these are all the same messages, all the same recipients. And these are 3 different open rates. The yellow is the open rate as measured by the mailbox provider based on the individuals who were opening the mail in the mailbox provider. The light blue is the ESP measurement that they were giving out to their users. And then the dark blue is the pixel open rate. So that is the number of images that were loaded. And as you can see, for the exact same amount of email, opens don't matter. The number doesn't correlate with very much at all. So we have to really rethink open rates. And if there's nothing else that you take out of this, I need you to think about that open rates are not about individuals. And I know a lot of marketers are really into, well, they opened it, so they must be interested in it. They opened it so I can send them more mail. They opened it so they are engaged with me. No, they didn't open it. You don't know that. You just know that an image was loaded. This is another slide from the Omnivory folks looking at the clicks, and these are consumer domains showing the non-human clicks. I don't have a whole lot to say about this other than it happens, and it can be, 20, 25% of the clicks that are in your system are actually being done by bots. More late breaking news, and this was actually just last night. They announced Omnivory announced that they were launching a bot detection API, and they might be here. But I got permission, and this is the link. It's omnivory.com/bot API, and you can go look at the bot docs and see what kinds of things they're doing and seeing how they're doing it so that you can kind of incorporate this bot detection into your own systems and mitigate some of the bad data that's coming into your systems. But the takeaway here for metrics is really that we can't trust opens and we can't trust clicks. That the metrics that we have relied on for years to tell us which individual recipients are interacting with our messages just don't tell us that anymore. And moving forward, we're going to have to develop new metrics and new ways to measure user engagement with emails, and have to do that in a privacy-focused way. We have to understand that we cannot do some of these things which are kind of privacy invading. Like, I don't want the company, that's sending me email to know that I was walking by the local grocery store while I was reading email, because they can tell where I am due to all of this privacy invading stuff. So we need to think about what are the next generation of metrics? And I've made the joke, it's kind of been half a joke, that somebody smarter than me is going to figure out a way to get around this. But I've made that statement for long enough that that's not encouraged anybody to figure it out. So either people aren't getting the hint, or this is a really hard problem and is going to take a lot of work and a lot of information to solve. So that was filters, that was inboxes, and that was metrics. That's where we are for each of those individual things. But to look at the future, we need to kind of put them all together, because we can't take them, they're not independent variables. They are dependent variables and they interact with each other. So what does the future of deliverability look like? The future of deliverability is that email filters are evolving to create reputation as a one-to-one or a one-to-few interaction between a sender and a recipient. There are a lot of senders out there that are sneaking in some kind of dodgy mail. They're sneaking in some spam because there's kind of this average effect, and reputation is an average. And so they're getting some mail in. And in fact, I've been known to say, hey, look, you can get away with, say, 10% of your overall volume as cold email, because that'll just get lost in the reputation. And I think we're seeing that that's not going to be true for much longer, that you're not going to be able to sneak that cold email in. You're not going to be able to sneak that spam in based on how the filters are going, where it's a one-to-one between a sender and a recipient. And some of that filter development is actually being driven by the cold emailers who are sending so much cold email and that users are so angry by. But that's where we're going. And I think the biggest sign for this is Google pulling out the IP and domain reputation reports from the Postmaster tools. They're deciding that the data that they were sharing with us was not telling people what they needed to know. It was not giving them enough actionable information. And Google has said that they're going to give us different charts and they're going to give us different ways to look at this. But they've not done it yet. So I'm really interested, and I think it's worthwhile to keep an eye on Google Postmaster tools to know where they're getting to and to know where things are going to happen and see what that future is, because that's going to be a hint as to what they're doing. The email clients themselves, the mailboxes, your Google web interface or your iOS apps or your Android apps or even your desktop mail client, those are all evolving, again, to give users more control over the mail that's coming into the inbox, to give them a way to look at how many companies are sending them bulk email, and then give them a way to manage that subscription. So again, we're looking at putting more and more on the user, but giving them the tools to manage that volume, to give them the tools to manage that bulk email, and taking control away from senders. And this is just reality. And senders are going to have to figure out ways to change what they're doing such that they respect those individual users. It's no longer a segment. It's no longer a cohort. It's no longer a group of subscribers. It is this subscriber. It is that subscriber. And then finally, in the metric space, we're seeing a focus on user privacy, protecting user privacy. The Apple, it's called Mail Privacy Protection. They're doing this specifically. They're prefetching those images specifically to protect their users' privacy. Google's prefetching as well, Yahoo's prefetching and caching. Again, all of that is intended to give the users more privacy. So as we're thinking about what are we going to do, what metrics are we going to collect, how are we going to know how our mail is performing, how everything is doing, we're going to have to also consider, and what are the privacy implications of what we're doing, and how do we get to where we're going? So all of this is to say things are evolving. The other thing that is worth keeping an eye on, and this is you're looking down the road, is that there are new types of email authentication coming in, and I didn't get the slide done, but there's new types of email authentication coming in. The folks who do email standards are working on the DMARC. It's called DMARC BIS, but it's basically DMARC 2.0, and it's an evolution of DMARC that is either been published or is still in the editorial space and will be published, but it has been improved by the working group and is ready to go. So that will come out, and for the senders and for marketers, not a whole lot has changed, but for receivers, there's some differences there in how you're calculating reputation and determining which DMARC policy applies. There's also a new working group that's been established to look at DKIM and to do DKIM2 and to make some changes there. So we're also seeing the underlying technology behind email developing. And I think that's a little over my 30 minutes, but are there any questions? Does anybody want to ask me anything, challenge me, do all of that kind of thing? I don't see a whole lot of questions in the question panel.
Hi, Laura. I think everyone has been paying rapt attention. I have learned a lot. So if you have any questions, now is a great time to ask Laura, and I'll read it to her. Other than that, we'll have to move on because we are like a bit behind schedule. Do we all understand what Laura is saying? If we do, kindly drop your reactions. Like, let me see your emojis. Yeah, let me see your emojis. Don't be shy, because okay,
All
seems
right.
like.
So
Oh yeah.
here's where you can reach me. Wordtothewise.com. About my email is our way of yes, an IP can recover over time. So can you fix an IP reputation? And the answer is yes. How long it takes to recover? I usually tell them, my rule of thumb is it takes as long to repair a reputation as it took you to break it in the first place. So if you've been doing bad things for a really long time, it's going to take longer to fix. If you had something broke and you've only been doing it for 2 weeks, you can probably recover pretty quickly. So it really depends on how long you've been doing it. It also depends on the history. I know we've had some IP reputation stuff where the IP address was what spammers would do is they'd like send bad mail for a week and then they would rest the IP for 3 months and then they would come back and they would send good mail for 2 weeks in a warm up period and then they would drop a bunch of spam and then they would repeat the cycle over and over. And after a while, the ISPs started to get a little bit onto this, and so it takes longer and longer and longer to recover the more often they've seen bad traffic from you and the longer that's been going on. So thank you all very much. It's been lovely talking to you today, and you can reach me at my website wordtothewise.com or on LinkedIn. Join up, contact me, ask me questions. I'm available.
All right. Thank you so much, Laura. And as Ruth had mentioned during her keynote speech, our keynotes, we're going to end this session so we can join the next one happening by, I think, 10 a.m. your time. I don't know, it's weird, but it's going to be 11 my time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So see us all soon. Our speaker is super excited to meet with us. I can't wait to hear what Ricardo has to say. He's an email designer and developer. I know you're excited to meet him. So am I excited to learn from him. So see us all. And thank you so much for your rapt attention. I think I'm going to give a gift to the first person that joins the next session. All right, now. Bye, everyone. See you soon. Bye, Laura. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
We are the Mautic community.